Today, we're going to talk about, it's called Choosing Your Flavor of God, is the title. And it's based on the idea of Ishta Devata. Ishta Devata is a Sanskrit term. And in the Indian mystical tradition, in both Hinduism and also the Tantric Buddhist traditions that come from Nepal and Tibet, in certain regions of India, there are so many different gods and goddesses and deities. And in Tibetan Buddhism, there's so many different bodhisattvas and dakinis and ascended masters. And each one, you could say, represents different aspects of the divine. People in our time, and I'm not going to say here because we're all over the place, including India, including places like Nepal. I'm not sure if we're in Tibet yet, but in this modern globalized moment that we're in, where we have access to so many different ideas and teachings, it can feel like we have this big array of choices available to us when we think about, what is the flavor of the divine that we want to relate to? Do we have an Ishta Devata, a chosen deity? In Hinduism, in Tantric Buddhism, although they have so many different gods and goddesses and so on, usually a Hindu or a Tantric Buddhist will have one main Ishta Devata or chosen deity. And, this isn't that. I'm not a Hindu. We're not Hindus, in Big Heart Meditation. We're yogis and mystics. And, my training comes from the same tradition that Hinduism comes from. But Hinduism is I think of it as a religion as opposed to the spiritual path of yoga, of tantra, the path of transformation. So, let's talk about it. Let's get into it. I think it's really interesting because there are a couple of different things that we need to navigate if we're going to do this. And one that I just have to name right off the bat is a term that was coined by a Buddhist master called Trungpa, which is spiritual materialism. Spiritual materialism is a term that he coined that I think is such an important idea in all of this. And what it is, first of all, what spiritual materialism is not is expensive yoga pants or Om jewelry or something like that. Or, people charging money for yoga. That's just materialism or capitalism. That's different. Spiritual materialism is when we have this idea that collecting spiritual material, spiritual experiences, spiritual teachings, relationships with teachers, facts, stories, mantras, that collecting all of that stuff makes us somehow or another better. The same way that in ordinary materialism, the idea is, if we have more stuff, we're better. Trungpa talks about spiritual materialism as a kind of an ignorance, as a kind of a pitfall on the path. And, he coined this term back in the early 70s when yoga and meditation and Eastern mysticism was just really blasting off in a big way in the West. Man, oh man, has it exploded since then. spiritual materialism. That was pre-internet. That was pre-yoga boom. So the reason why we need to talk about it is because when I talk about choosing your flavor of God, I chose this little bit of a snappy title to make it, sound interesting. And, I wasn't going to put Ishta Devata in the title of the thing, because if you don't know what that is, why would you want to do it? But I'm saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek of choose your flavor of God. It's not just such a flippant thing. And it's not a thing like choosing your flavor of coffee or choosing your flavor of ice cream. Or, this is something that all of the spiritual stuff that I teach, hopefully, is here to help you actually be freer, be more empowered. In some cases, these things that we learn on the path can really save us, save our lives in some cases, and at the very least save us from a great degree of suffering. That's the goal of it. And that's the only reason why I would even talk about this or anything that I talk about. I'm not a collector of spiritual stuff unnecessarily. I mean, I kind of am, because as a teacher, I feel like it's important for me to learn lots of different things, even if I'm not necessarily going to use them. But as a practitioner, I try to really be entirely practical and only learn things that I need and use things that actually work. All right, so spiritual materialism, the idea of just collecting stuff for the sake of distracting, or shopping, ooh, that's attractive, let me have that. Okay, that's not what we're doing. The other thing to navigate around this conversation, Ishta Devata, is superstition. Superstition. And, I'll define that as taking some of these ideas very literally. Very literally in the sense of believing, let's say, if we worship a certain deity, something very specific is going to happen. Okay, that's a relatively innocent superstition. The more dangerous ones are the ones that if I somehow don't worship them correctly or insult them or something, then a curse is going to come on me. We can talk about that in a little bit. But that's not the way that it works. I can say verifiably as a senior teacher on this path that it doesn't work like that. I understand about curses and blessings, and I think there is such a thing, but it doesn't happen from worshiping the wrong deity or getting a mantra wrong that we're trying to use. Our curses and blessings have to do with the bondage and liberation of our minds and our hearts and our ability to work with negative energies in our minds, in our hearts, in the world. Let's talk about Ishta Devata. A long time ago, I was teaching in Brooklyn and in New York, and I realized that within our yoga world, and this was many years ago now, no one would ever say the word God. Yoga is a spiritual tradition. It has always been a spiritual practice. It's always been related to things related to God, related to spirit, related to the subtle realm, the mystery. It's a mystical practice in its heart, but since it became an exercise fad, since it became this thing in the mainstream, since it became, in many cases, an alternative to religion, teachers and students had an allergy to the word God. So if I would say God, I would feel people kind of pucker up. And very few teachers would ever talk about God. I kind of knew it was just a problem with the word, but I was interested. So I started asking in the classes. And I remember this one class in particular, it was a workshop in Brooklyn, and I asked, how many people here feel comfortable with the word God, with using it? Like, believe in God. Do you believe in God? Do you feel comfortable with it, you know? And very few people in the room raised their hand. Right? And so I asked, okay, the negative way. How many people here are uncomfortable with the idea of God, with the word God? Everybody raised their hand. Just about. It was a big room full of people. Almost everybody raised their hand. And then I said, okay, but here you are. Just imagine for a moment. You can do this with me right now. You're driving down the road and your car goes off the road and crashes, and you're in your car and you're bleeding to death. No help is going to come. And you know that this is your last moment. In just minutes, you're going to die, or you could die. Imagine that now. In that situation, are you going to pray? How many people here in that situation would pray? Almost everybody, when they were being honest, also raised their hand. So they're really uncomfortable with it, but when push comes to shove, they kind of believe in something. And so there's this thing, and then there are so many euphemisms. So instead of saying God, we say the universe. That doesn't totally work, and I'll explain why in a minute. Or we'll say, goodness, or, God, nature, or spirit with a capital S. Okay, fine. I use all of those too. But here's the thing. We have to be honest, and we have to be authentic. And I believe that not just honest and authentic, but if we're going to have a connection to spirit, it needs to be potent. It needs to be something that has some potency to it, some energy to it, if it's really going to help us. If in that moment, like the soldier in a foxhole, we're in a car crash or something like that, and we don't already have that relationship established, or we're not sure where that prayer is going or where we're directing it, it's not going to be as powerful. And the thing is, on one hand, in this moment, so much spiritual materialism, so much dabbling, so much flavor of the month kind of spirituality. So much in the New Age, frankly, I find is not potent because it does have this aspect of we're all customers shopping. We're all consumers, having a little bit of this and a little bit of that, which, I think really, for the most part, takes away from the potency in spirituality, on one hand. On the other hand, we really can get beyond religion. I feel like religion is just impotent in another way. The religions, they all come from patriarchal traditions. They all come from traditions that are riddled with bigotry and political oppression and so many things that are not actually beneficial. I believe that people use religion as a substitute for mystical experience. Religion is a substitute for the path of sadhana. I mean, sometimes, it can be a vehicle, but for the most part, it's the same thing with spiritual materialism, guys. It's the same exact thing. So I have this statue of Ganesha, the elephant-headed deity, here on my side table, and I love it so much. It's very beloved to me. I bought this when I was doing a retreat at a place called Kripalu, which some of you know. You've been on retreat with me there. At a very special moment. So it has all of that. And also I have a connection to Ganesha. Now, if this is just here as a decoration, right, that's more like the spiritual materialism. Or if I'm just trying to show that like I'm cool and spiritual and mystical or something like that, that's also, what is that? If this is when it gets more subtle, this is a substitute for my own experience of what Ganesha represents, then it becomes like a religious thing. Because after all, we're having this conversation in the context of I as a teacher of yoga, of tantric yoga, of mystical yoga, and I don't mean the physical backbend yoga. I mean yoga as in becoming yoked, becoming yuked, becoming connected with spirit in a really tangible way. It's inside of us. Mahakala, this is a deity, a protector deity from the Tibetan tantric tradition. Again, not so that it's just a decoration, although it is quite beautiful, and I have it placed here specifically, but so that it represents something that I know that is in me when I tap into my own fiery heart. This is an energy in my soul. It's a tool. It's not a substitute. Even to use the third example, I have this photograph of Anandamayi Ma. She was a great guru, a great saint, a great spiritual master, lived in the latter part of the 20th century in India. And I love her. I love her energy. I love her teachings, although she didn't give a lot of formal teachings. I love what she represents. She's not a guru in my lineage exactly. But I have her photo on my side table, partly just to have her energy there, just because it's very beloved. But also, she represents, once again, something that my path is about tapping into. And so it's here as a reminder. It's here as a tool, as opposed to a prop, as opposed to a superstitious thing that I believe that, well, if Ganesha is here, I'm going to have good luck. There are these two terms that I need to teach about, and I don't mean to get technical or get too scholarly. I'm not a scholar, far from it. These two terms in Sanskrit, nirguna and saguna. You might know the word guna. It's a common word. Guna means quality. It means the nature. It means the quality of something. Like I have the qualities of being masculine and having a gray beard and wear glasses, and these are my qualities. Guna can mean that. It can also mean like an attitudinal kind of quality. So nirguna means with no qualities. Saguna means with qualities. In the Indian mystical tradition, where this stuff all comes from, the idea of Ishtadevata comes from, people relate to God generally either as nirguna or saguna. People relate to God in a nirguna way when they're relating to the all-pervasive absolute without qualities. It's just the energy of creation. It's the energy of maybe grace or the energy that sustains the universe. We can use words like Brahman, Satchidananda, the formless absolute. Or they relate, now again, I'm talking about in the Indian milieu in particular, like the Hindu milieu. They relate to God in a saguna way. So they relate to the elephant-headed Ganesha, or they relate to Shiva, or Shakti, or Durga, or Kali, or the monkey-faced Hanuman. One of these different gods or goddesses or deities that have qualities. In the Bhagavad Gita, there's a verse that talks about this. It says that, well, we have qualities. And so it's harder for us to relate to something that is formless. It's easier for us to relate to something with form. It says it right in the Bhagavad Gita. And this is a huge dilemma. I mean, I think it's an answer to a huge dilemma where people say, well, did God create mankind in God's image, or did mankind create God in mankind's image? This kind of answers it. That's what I like about some of this, deep Indian philosophy stuff, is that it really can help us to deconstruct some of this stuff. Because it's both. It's both. And the fact of the matter is that the more that we relate to something, the more we're going to relate to something. If I enjoy my exercise equipment, I'm going to exercise more often. If it fits me, if it suits me, if it's something that actually is what is the equipment that I need, I'm more likely to use it than something that fits somebody else, that suits the needs of somebody else. Or in many cases, it's just like, what were we born into? We were born into Islam or Christianity or Judaism or Hinduism or a particular kind of Buddhism or whatever the case may be. Most of us were born into capitalism. That's the main religion that most of our families practice, and with a touch of whatever else. It's a capitalism, materialism with a little flavor of Judaism, or it's capitalism and materialism with a flavor of Catholicism or whatever. So we get to choose. And, if we're exposed enough to be hearing this talk right now, then we're exposed to a lot of stuff. There's the whole pantheon in Hinduism. And like I said, Tantric Buddhism and Dakinis and Bodhisattvas. And but not just that, but also so many of the sort of shamanistic traditions and traditions that come from First Nations here in the U.S., ideas that come from indigenous peoples all over the world. And also major religions. I have, iconography from the Catholic tradition, because it's part of, what I grew up around, but also, like Mother Teresa. She's a massive influence, a massive hero to me, and someone who played a pivotal role in my spiritual life when I was young. All of the major religions have mystical strains to them. You probably know this, but Islam has, very orthodox kind of strains to it, to the extent of it being, really oppressive, especially to women and non-Muslims. And it also has really beautiful strains to it, like Sufism. Like certain strains of Sufism are just completely in line with the kind of stuff that we teach. And people that are not Indians, but relate to some Indian culture and mysticism, might not know that people in India don't all practice yoga. People in India are not all yogis. All Hindus are not mystical. Hinduism can also just be a completely superficial religion and an oppressive religion. Any religion can be used to oppress people, especially outsiders, people of different races, women, gay people. Every religion has that option, including yoga. Let's be real, okay? Buddhism, same thing. There's mystical traditions, there's religious traditions. Christianity, same thing. So we have all of this available to us, and along with all of that, then we have these different psychotherapeutic traditions. We have Jungian psychology and things like the tarot. We have things like astrology. We have things like Ayurveda. We have so many different influences that can be tools in our spiritual life. So many, and this is why I wanted to give this talk, that we can get very easily lost. And we can very easily become dabblers and consumers. So it's important, I think, for us to give some consideration to this and see, if we had an Ishta Devata, what would it be? If we had a chosen deity, what does our heart feel most drawn to, pulls the devotion kind of energy out of us? And it also can change. It doesn't have to just stay as one thing. Nirguna and saguna, in my tradition, like my teacher's teacher, who's called Muktananda, he really encouraged people to see it both ways. That the formless is, and also that formless, because it's infinite, because it's divine, can take any form. And that any given form that we might connect with, relate to, chant to, have a photo of, have a statue representing, any form is a form of the formless. It's taking us to that formlessness. So we don't need to stress about it. We don't need to get hung up about it, about this one versus that one. When I go to Mexico, for example, and I see some of these Catholic altars that you see around, oftentimes to a form of Mary. Oftentimes it's Our Lady of Guadalupe. I see that, and that is a goddess temple. It just is. It's gone even philosophically and traditionally way beyond like the mother of Jesus. She's her own deity. I relate more to the goddess idea than I do of some idea of Mary. I think that probably that story is very patriarchally spun, virgin birth and so on and so forth. But as a deity, as an embodiment of grace, of that Ma, of that goddess energy, every tradition has goddesses. Every tradition has the divine feminine. Sure, give me Mary. To me, Jesus Christ, that's the tradition that I was born into. When I see Jesus Christ, okay, there's perhaps a historical figure, a spiritual master, Yeshua, from Nazareth. Fantastic, beautiful teachings, wonderful energy if you tap into it very directly. And what I see is like my photograph of Anandamayi Ma. I see this as a depiction of the Guru with a capital G. The Guru in my tradition is another deity. It's the Guru is that Guru principle, the principle of grace, the principle of a human being transforming into a vehicle for the divine. The Guru. That's what I see when I see a picture of Zasarusta. I'm not saying it right, but the Zoroastrians, which is a lesser known religion, Parsis in India. Same thing with Guru Nanak of the Sikhs. You understand? When I see the image of the Buddha, oftentimes the image of the Buddha really is, because it's a relatively atheistic path, it's a depiction of our own Buddha nature. All the different bodhisattvas represent something different. But it's all representative of something formless and something that's inside of us. In the Hindu tradition in particular, there's so many different gods and goddesses, and most of them are representational. They're representational of some particular vibration of that one energy. Hinduism is not a pantheistic religion. It's not like ancient Greece where they worship different gods and goddesses. I mean, some people do, no doubt about it, in Hindu religion. But from a philosophical point of view, they all represent different facets, different flavors of that one power of the divine, which is neither male nor female, and it's definitely not human. But we can depict it in these different ways. So the elephant-headed Ganesha is oftentimes representative of removing of obstacles, the power of grace, the power of divine to bless something in a massive way, like with an elephant's kind of energy. The remover of obstacles, also known as the Lord of Thresholds. So you'll see images of Ganesha over doorways in India, and we remember Ganesha when we're starting something new. The threshold between one moment and the next, we invoke the power of Ganesha for that smooth transition. And on and on. You can go on and on, especially with the Indian deities, on and on and on and on. He has a color, yellow. He has a chakra. He lives in the root chakra. He's the guard of the root chakra. He's got mantras, different mantras, so many things. The goddess Lakshmi. She's the consort. She's the female companion of Vishnu, the sustaining energy of the universe. So she is, the goddesses, by the way, fun fact, the goddesses are the power of the gods. So any given god, if they have a female with them, the female is their power. So Vishnu is the sustaining energy of God. Lakshmi is the power of sustenance, is the power of wealth, is the power of beauty, is the power of nourishment. Shri, she's called. She's the power of newness. Okay? So, a superstitious Hindu might worship Lakshmi to get money. Or if they don't have money, might blame Lakshmi or think that they've insulted her in some way, shape, or form. Durga with all of her weapons, warrior goddess, again, removing of obstacles, fighting delusion. Kali, the terrible form with, a bloody sword and heads around her neck and her tongue hanging out. Again, it can represent so many things. For me, especially with these intense protector deities in Tibetan Buddhism or images like Kali, or some of the fearsome forms of Lord Shiva, to me, it's not about anger. Oftentimes people will relate to Kali as a form of female anger, which I think is unfortunate because it's a very small box. Kali is not a human thing. Kali is the full intensity of grace, the unstoppability, the absolute off the hook energy of grace. Just that totality is what all of that intense stuff refers to. The fire and the flames, and you can go into a rabbit hole with any of these. Hanuman, the monkey, a representation of service and devotion, of humility. On and on. So then there may be a main theme for you in your spiritual life. Maybe, like me, you came from the school of hard knocks. So you might really relate to some of these intense warrior deities. Or you might relate to the idea of a savior, these savior images. If you've been saved, I've been saved. I know what they talk about when they talk about being born again. I've been there. And I've seen countless other people go, that's my job in that sense. I'm an evangelist in that sense, is helping people to be born again. Not as born again Christians or even born again yogis, but to be born again human beings. You might relate to that. You might really relate to service. The Hanuman energy. You might really relate to, and want to invoke these cool energies, these stoic energies, the Buddha just sitting in perfect meditation. The gentle bodhisattva, just this total embodiment of compassion and gentleness. Or the goddess, all these tantric erotic goddesses, the erotic energies are not evil in the non-dual traditions. They're part of it. And so there are these goddesses that are just oozing erotic energy, and they're wonderful. And again, a form of that formless energy, but in the form of Lalita is one of them. Some of the depictions of Lakshmi, some of the depictions of Parvati. Saraswati, the goddess of learning and wisdom and music. You might be an artist, you might be a writer, you might really relate to things from that point of view of creativity and learning. And so maybe Saraswati becomes very important for you. Like I said before with my statue of Ganesha, there can also be things that are sentimental, where at a certain point there was a connection that was really important to you. And so then that form of the formless gets a special place in your heart, and maybe on your altar, maybe in your home. I have always related very deeply to the energy of Hanuman. I have a big Hanuman, image tattooed on my arm, for instance. I have a large photograph of a statue of Hanuman that is in a very beloved place to me from India. And it's all of it. It's what Hanuman represents, but it's also that place in India and what that represents to me, that particular place. It's not just like a collection of like a place that I've gone, but I've had like massive transformations in that place. But the reason I have that photograph is once upon a time, I had this massive experience where I was in Varanasi in India, and I went to this very famous Hanuman temple called Sankatamochan, and it was a place where people go to ask for stuff. Very specifically, they ask for boons to be granted. And I was just visiting because it was an important temple and I loved Hanuman and I was there, so I went. And by the time I was up in front of the statue of Hanuman, this is amazing. It's like this big orange kind of a blob thing with eyeballs. It's very abstract and very intense energy. I was standing in front of it and I just thought, oh yeah, I'm supposed to ask for a boon. And I didn't have anything preloaded. And so I just touched in. I was teaching in New York in those days, and it came up. Let me have a place for my community in New York. At that time, I was doing private sessions like I do now, but I was renting part-time this office from this acupuncture. It was like in a little healing place, and I had a little place where I could meditate with people and meet with them. And it was cool. But in that moment, what arose in me was this, oh no, I want to have my own place. I want to have a place where my community can come and we can meet together. And I came back to New York from India, and through a series of pretty miraculous events, I ended up with this wonderful place that it was like an office and a little classroom in Soho neighborhood in New York. It was way beyond my wildest dreams of a place. And to honor that and to honor the kind of miracle that happened around all of that, I commissioned this gorgeous photograph of a statue of Hanuman and had it in that space. So we can have things like that where these chosen deities come in for us. But what I wanted to focus on today, and I'm going to lead a practice here shortly that you can do with me, where you can tune into this, is looking at ourselves not as followers or worshipers or small things that are looking to connect to big things, but instead, because this is a path of yoga, this is a path of sadhana, this is a path of transformation, whether you relate to being a yogi or not, doesn't matter. If we're on a path of transformation, then we're in what one text called the Guru Gita talks about, the worm and the wasp. Then the worm and the wasp is like the caterpillar and the butterfly. That we're not relating to these powers as something that is greater than us or that's going to make us greater, but these are things that are already in us, that we're on the path of excavating. We're on the path of discovering and bringing them out and embodying them. That's how I define yoga. It's the path of discovering, owning, and then expressing our own human magnificence. And so then these deities, these Ishtadevatas, these different things that we choose to connect with, are there as tools on that path. They're means to that end. Or get rid of them. And then it just becomes spiritual junk. Then it just becomes this other thing on our wall or on our altar that, meant something at one point and now you can't even remember what. Clear it off. Let it have significance or let it have freedom. Go take your statues and throw them in the ocean if they're not plastic. Okay. Let's do a little practice. Can we? And again, thank you for listening and thank you for participating. You might want to stretch a little bit just to get your body ready to go inside. This isn't going to be long. But I'm going to show you a little practice of how I like to relate to these deities. When you're ready, you can let your eyes close. If you have a representation, whether it's a painting or a statue or even a digital image sometimes, you could do it with your eyes open. It's called the practice of upasana. It's a practice of sitting and relating to, connecting with these deities. Very vulnerably, I'll say that oftentimes when I'm connecting to spirit, I'm connecting to what I call, I don't know if I've shared this out loud before, even with people very close to me, I call it the radiant one. The radiant one. So it's an energy that radiates, and sometimes it is a sort of most enlightened, illumined version of me. And sometimes it's just energy, and sometimes it has a sort of a form of a god or a goddess. It's kind of non-binary being that is very radiant and the embodiment of spirit for me, the radiant one. For you, it might be something different. It might be something really specific, a very specific ascended master or a very specific deity of some sort. Fine. Whatever it is in this moment, and don't get hung up on commitment issues. You can have many, but for this practice, have one. And have them before you in your mind's eye. This is the practice. It's just sitting before them and breathing in and out of them. Like you're breathing into them and they're breathing into you. If they have a humanoid form, you can imagine them just kind of sitting and mirroring you. Sitting right across from you, or even sitting with you, like conjoined with them, even in a sort of the tantrics will even envision in sexual union with the deity. That's maybe for another day to get deep into that, or probably even for different context than this. But you're there and you're relating to them and you're breathing into them and they're breathing into you. And just sharing this energy. You could be very free. You might have specific mantras or specific prayers. If you want to offer those. But you can also be very free. Very open with how you do this. And again, it's just a more radiant part of you. I like to, within this moment of connection, give thanks. Thanks for life. Thanks for the blessings. Thanks for being spared different calamities. Thanks for all things. And thanks just for being in my life. Thank you, 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 thank you. Like gushing. And then there can be an ask. There can be an ask. You might have a specific ask in your life. Here's the formula. You connect, you give thanks to the point where you can feel it, and then you ask, and then you promise. The promise relates to the ask. And, it's something like, let the money flow into my life more abundantly. Everyone always usually needs more money. And so the ask could be, it could be, thank you so much for all the abundance in my life. Please allow there to be more abundance flowing into my life. Let there be more money flowing into my life. And then there's the promise. And when it does, I promise I will be generous with it and spend it well and take care of it. And just use it to get closer to you. Oh, beloved, radiant one. But for this, so that I wanted to just tell you that to teach you the formula. But for this meditation, do this with me. It's all about connection. It's all about the union. Thank you for being in my life, radiant one. Thank you for living in my body. You live in my body, and thank you. The ask is, let me be closer with you. Let me really know you. Let me merge with you, radiant one. That's my ask. Try that ask. And the promise is, and as I do merge with you, and the more you are in me and I'm conscious of you in me, I promise to share this energy with others. I promise to be a vehicle for grace. I promise to be a servant of this love, a carrier of this wisdom. That's my promise. But my ask is just come closer. Let me be closer. Let us not separate. I'm so grateful. And then when that's complete, and that could be the beginning of a long and very juicy meditation, but when that's complete, you can make a gesture. I like to make a gesture with my body. I like to put my hands together, fold my hands, bow my head. And then when you're ready, open your eyes. It's like a visit to an inner temple. But you see that formula, once again, I'll say it, you connect first, you give thanks until you feel it, then there can be an ask, and there can be a promise that relates to that ask. And again, as you do this review and you think about like what energies you want to bring in, what could be an Ishtadevata for you, let it be really, really practical. What you need on your path for growth, on your path to liberation.